My topic tonight is Jesus in the Market, Class, Equity, and Privilege. If you were here last week, you saw the announcement and you would have heard that it was going to be Yesenia giving this talk. Clearly, I am not Yesenia. Yes. As we all know, the semester just gets really overwhelming and sometimes everything comes in all at once. And it also happens that writing one of these talks can be very overwhelming and just consume a lot of time. And Yesenia and I had a conversation last week where we realized this was going to be a very bad confluence of things for her. And I said, how about I do it? And she said, yes. So she was disappointed to not do it, but very also relieved that her life was going to work. And so that's why I'm up here doing this, but we can credit her with coming up with the theme for this talk for this semester, the scripture that's being used, and the general framing of it. Everything after that, so there she is. So all the great stuff is hers, and anything that is bad, that's probably my addition. Okay.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you. Guys, Craig.
All right. So, but this is a lot going on, right? As I was thinking about this, you could say so much on this topic, right? And so I started, as I was working on it, I found myself creating kind of a shorthand as to what question I was answering. And the shorthand I kept coming back to was, Jesus in the Market. Was Jesus a Marxist? So that question, was Jesus as a Marxist, was just in my mind. And it was kind of going around and around in there. This is going to be a long night if I can't make this thing work. You know, it only works when you're setting up in the beginning, and then it stops working like that. Okay. Did you do that, or did I do that? It's a mystery. All right. I'll try this other remote too. Okay. So let's see here. So, and as I thought about this, I thought, this is kind of like the question this is the Pitzer question, right? So, was Jesus a Marxist? So then what's the CMC question? But Jesus was a capitalist, right? Or maybe like the Pomona and Scripps way of thinking it, we just go back to that really wordy title and we emphasize it. Like class, equity, privilege. And then the mutters. I just graduated. What should I do now that I'm making all the money? But seriously, we think a lot about these questions here on these campuses, about economic systems and how they work, but also what's good, mostly what's wrong, like what's wrong with them, how would we fix it, how would we change it? And tonight, I want to ask, how does the Bible speak into those questions? And especially, is there a Christian lens that might help us to think about them? And I want to begin, though, by hearing from each other. So all of you have, like I said, have been thinking about this for a long time. So I'd like you to turn to a couple neighbors and just share, not like your take on the whole system necessarily, but what concerns you most about our current economic system or systems. That could be on the macro level, if you really do like to, but it could also be like specific things, like specific concerns you have. Like I'll seed it. One of the concerns I have is that the way our system works right now, it seems to contribute a lot toward environmental collapse, right? And if I could fix something about it, that's the thing I would want to fix. So what are things that specific things that bother you, or even individual worries that you may have about your own place in this system as you graduate or whatever? So turn to a couple neighbors and just share off the top of your head on this topic. Oh, one last really quick, this is really important. We all come from a lot of different perspectives and backgrounds in this room. We treasure that at CCF. And so practice good listening techniques. This is not the critique or argue with your neighbor time. This is the, let's find out what my neighbors really think about something time, and just take that in and learn. All right? Go. All right, let's come back together. I know we could talk forever about this. But let's come back. I'm having a hard time with this microphone. All right. Well, I'd like to hear from some of you the things we said in our groups. Let's do the short bullet version. What are some of the things that came up as you were talking with each other? Just shout them out.
Wealth inequality.
Oh, you go.
Wealth inequality.
Wealth inequality, great.
Our group idolizes Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and hope to become their baby mamas.
I am listening with an open mind.
Sometimes, working more doesn't lead to more money.
Yeah, working more doesn't lead to more money. Yeah, I'm going to repeat these, I think, so that we can all hear. Well, yeah. What else?
Healthcare is terrible.
Yeah.
How is healthcare terrible?
Not healthcare, the healthcare monetary system
Yeah.
is terrible. I want more healthcare. I don't like how it's not applied to everyone.
Yeah, right. Yeah. The healthcare is a big problem. It's too expensive. It's not evenly distributed. There's a lot with healthcare. What else? Exploitation. Millionaire televangelists. Oh, I was hoping to become one of those. This was my start right here with this camera. Planned obsolescence. Yeah, and all the ways that we produce waste, right? Like just generating waste. What? Planned obsolescence. So like where a company designs a product so that it will become unusable after a while, and then it has to be thrown away or repurchased in some other form.
Think Apple, basically.
Yeah, right. Any other ones you want to throw out? I'm sure there's a plenty.
Lack of accountability.
Go ahead, Robinson.
Lack of accountability.
Okay, lack of accountability.
Environmental destruction,
Yeah.
and then that also perpetuates like a bunch of other issues like of inequity in our society as well.
Yeah. So we could go on. I mean, we could make a really, really big list, I think, and I agree with pretty much everything I think that was said here tonight. A lot of these things hit us on a personal level. Some of them are very systemic, and we feel that too. But some of them also can get very personal for us. I'll tell you, for me, for years now, my go-to anxiety, and I'm good with anxiety, I have lots of them. My go-to anxiety is fear about providing for my family financially into the future. I think that as Lorraine and I had a family with having our daughter, and then as our parents have gotten older and realizing like, oh my gosh, our parents can't keep bailing us out forever. This is that's rested really heavily on my shoulders. And even though we're fine, we have a retirement fund, we have enough to live on, we have a house in Claremont. I mean, we're incredibly privileged actually with what we have. Those anxieties still hit me. I would honestly rather give up all prospects of ever earning a lot of money and even a lot of the privilege I already have, just to have the security of knowing that, as long as I'm willing to work, we'll be taken care of, health-wise, home-wise, clothing, food. That would just take so much anxiety off my shoulders. So it gets at a really personal level. Well, what does the Bible have to say about these concerns, the questions we're raising? And specifically, what is Jesus' prescription for a well-ordered, functional, good economy? Well, we're going to start with a story, and it is literally Jesus in a market. The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. Making a whip of cords, he drove all of them out of the temple, with the sheep and the cattle. He also poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. He told those who were selling the doves, "Take these things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." Well now, this is unexpected. For many of us, it's a familiar story, but if you were a first-time reader and you've been reading through the story of Jesus, you've read through, from his birth, and I recognize it's in different orders in the different Gospels, but, and you get to this point, this behavior is not consistent with other things we've seen him do. This is the Prince of Peace making a whip out of some cords and chasing people, threatening them, yelling at them, chasing them out of, turning tables over, pouring money out on the ground. And you would be justified for wondering, what the heck is happening? Why is Jesus acting like a maniac? And then we as modern readers come into this with our very real questions about this world and how do we fix it and how do we navigate it. What are we supposed to do with this? Is the application to this text just go outside, find the Girl Scout table the cookie table in front of Starbucks and just flip it over and throw their money on the ground? I hope not. Please don't do that. My daughter might be there. Don't do that. The first thing I want to address then tonight is what the Bible doesn't say. A lot of people see the Bible as a set of blueprints or instruction manual for life. And you go to it with any question you have and you look at the manual and you read it and that's what you do. But Jesus doesn't give a blueprint. What we're seeing here is anything but a blueprint or a prescription. Nor does the Bible give any kind of a blueprint about this. And sorry, in answer to my questions earlier, Jesus was not a Marxist, nor was he a capitalist. Both of those systems are responses to modern problems and questions around economic issues, the rise of cities, the rise of the middle class, industrialization. And then we have new problems that those folks weren't even dealing with, globalization and information technology and an oil-based economy. Jesus wasn't speaking to any of that stuff. And in general, the Bible doesn't usually give easy answers to complex systemic issues. It is not as easy, I hope I don't ruffle anybody here too much. It's not going to be as easy as just picking one bad guy. Like, we're just going to blame capitalism, or we're just going to blame globalization, or we're just going to blame the tech bros for causing this problem. Because economic injustice is old. Those things might be a problem. They might be a big, we can work out where we think the problems are with any of those things. But whatever the ultimate answers are, they're going to be deeper and more complicated than just finding the next boogeyman to blame. So if the Bible doesn't do that, then what does it say? Does it have anything to say about these issues? Yes, so much, too much to say. We cannot get even touch tonight all the Bible has to say about economic systems and issues. All we're going to be able to do is just hit on a few little topics as we go. And what I hope we'll see as we look at them, we'll see some challenges that they raise, but overall, I hope we'll see an invitation to challenge our society towards economic justice and to embody that in our lives. And then we can work out the details as we go. A lot of people don't know how much the Bible has to say about economic injustice. There was an evangelical social activist, yes, they exist, social justice activists, and they certainly used to exist. His name is Jim Wallace. He founded the Center for Faith and Justice and this great Christian social justice magazine called Sojourners. And in the early days, after he founded Sojourners, he and his co-founders took a Bible and they went through and they found every verse in the Bible that deals with justice issues, money issues, economic stuff, and they cut them out. And they found over 2,000 verses that dealt with that, and they cut them all out. And what they had left was this Bible full of holes, a different kind of Holy Bible. A Bible it was just tattered. And he would bring this thing with him to when he would do speaking, like preaching tours at churches, and he'd stand up and be like, this is the Bible that so much of the church has been preaching out of. It is full of stuff to say about these issues. And we're just going to touch on a few of them. Sometimes these things, we're so familiar with them, we don't even realize they're dealing with issues of systemic and economic justice. Like this one about the Sabbath. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. You, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. I'm going to let this verse hang in the air for a second there, these two verses, because if you're like me, you suddenly think, what, slave? Right? Yes, the Bible, this is in the Bible, this assumption that people are going to have slaves in there. Slavery was ubiquitous in ancient times. And the ancient biblical writers took a lot of their world they lived in for granted. This is the way it was. It's the only way they could imagine it. And so these pieces of their ancient world show up in our text and get included in things like this. To me, it's a great reminder that we can't just lift an economic system and a political structure out of the scripture and apply it as though it's like this is God's desire for our reality today. Because it has stuff in it like this. Some people try to do that, but if we do that, all we're doing is we're taking like old regressive ways that whole areas of the world used to think and operate, and we're saying that's what God wants. And that's BS. We spent all these years getting rid of those things. We don't want to go back to them. So I think we can look at this and say, yeah, that's intense and that's a problem. But then what makes the Bible so inspiring to me are these moments when the authors, in their relationship with God and how they're working out who God is and what that means to them, the surprising ways they push back against their society. And we see that in the Sabbath. You see, all of the peoples where they were just worked all the time. At least the working people did, right? Like most of the people did. The ruling class did not. But they were the only ones who had any right, any expectation of rest and leisure. Everyone else, work was a daily thing you did every day until you died, with the exception of holidays. And there were often a lot of holidays and things like that, but no regular expectation of rest. And into this comes this commandment from God in the 10 Commandments. This is like one of the 10 Commandments, not a small thing, saying, you are going to take a rest every 7 days, like 1 out of every 7 days. It is going to be a regular thing, and it's going to be part of your life. And not just you, but everybody you see around you. Like you can tell it's written to men, right? Your sons and daughters, I guess maybe it was written to men. And then even people that in other cultures would have certainly been expected to work, even on holidays, are supposed to have a day of rest. Even the animals. You cannot make an animal work on the Sabbath. Nobody works on the Sabbath. What does that say about the place of rest and like next to work? And what does that say about the value of people? It asserts that human beings are not producing machines, that we're not cogs in the machine of the system. No human, no animal is just a worker. It shows us and challenges us, the culture, to value people apart from productivity. You have value when you're working, and you have value when you rest, because you always have value. Do you believe that? Or do you feel subtly guilty every time you take time off from doing work, and you're aware that people around you are working hard and you aren't? That guilt is that question. Am I doing what I should? Do I compare well to everybody else? Am I falling behind? All those fears coming in. You have value when you rest. The Sabbath challenges economic systems to promote rest and well-being. Think about this. We use GDP, gross domestic product, to measure how well a country is doing compared to other countries. But all that is just a measure of productivity, of wealth and human productivity in that place. The US has the highest GDP in the world, and yet we still are rife with racialized poverty. There's the middle of the country is being destroyed by an opioid addiction. The current expected lifespan of people is dropping in the US just because of opioid overdoses in the country, right? There's got to be a better way to measure how well we're doing than production and money, right? Some way to measure rest, contentment. And people are working on this. There's some pretty interesting economists who are trying to find different ways to think about this. The old business idea that what you measure is what you get applies here. We need to measure things that aren't so measurable, right? As measurable as money. One thing, those of you following the news, this is big in France right now, because the French president, Emmanuel Macron, is trying to fulfill some campaign promises to reform the pension system in France. Probably needs some reform. It looks like it's probably unsustainable in its current state. But the people do not trust him to do this work. And there's protests happening right now. And part of why they're protesting is the French people have worked really hard to try to create a state, a system, and a culture where life is not about work. Like that leisure and like other aspects of life occupy a prominent place. And because of that, they've tried to reduce the length of their work week, although it's kind of growing right now. And they've tried to make it so people can retire early and reasonably comfortably, and that would be taken care of. And the idea that the government's going to go in there and start fussing around and changing that is making people really worried and upset. Some French thinkers have even talked about something they call the right to be lazy. That is a fascinating concept. This culture, I would submit, isn't even trying. We're not even thinking about this stuff. I don't know if the French have taken it too far. Maybe they have, maybe they haven't. You can decide. It's not even on our radar. Does the US need this challenge? Does the Claremont colleges need this challenge? How might we not only challenge it, but embody it? I dare you to try taking a Sabbath. I dare you to do it. Even if you have to start with half a day, because you can't imagine a day. once a week. I dare you to set aside a day or half a day where you're not allowed to work. Imagine what that would do for you and to you. Right now, you're all thinking that you fall behind it and it would ruin you, right? That's the fear talking. That is the fear. I have seen countless students take the risk to try this and love it. I've never talked to a student who's done this who said like they regretted it. And then they just hold on to it. Like, you will not take this from me, right? Because it's not just being lazy or like catching up on your sleep. It's the feeling of all those things that are always hanging over my head. Today, I'm not allowed to think about them. Try it. We can make a real difference on these campuses just by being people who embody rest and talk about it. I'm going to move on. There's so much more to say. So many more cool commands in the law. One other one I just want to highlight. This is from Leviticus 25. And you shall hallow the 50th year, and you shall proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. You shall return every one of you to your property, and every one of you to your family. There's a lot more to this. I'm just going to summarize. The idea of this law is wild. The idea was every 50th year, so in cycles, all of the property that had been sold or lost in debt or anything else by people would return to the original owners and start over again. And people would return back to their land. This was a really big deal in an agrarian society, right? Because in an agrarian society, your traditional family land, it's part of your identity. And it's also it's your whole way of having a sustainable life going forward. Once you lose that in an agrarian society, you may just have to be like a wandering worker, essentially, right? Migrant labor, and you never know if you're going to find the work you need, or if your family will have to split up, or other things like that. But this thing was designed to keep that from happening, and to make sure that some people over some bad harvests or whatever else didn't permanently lose that thing for their whole family, while someone else came in and scooped up this and scooped up that, and pretty soon became a mega landlord. Powerful. As far as we know, no one ever practiced this system. It was written in the law. We have no evidence that it was ever done. My guess is it's pretty hard to convince all the entrenched, powerful interests, hey, give back all that property that you bought, right? It was supposed to be you bought it as a loan, like for that rest of whatever left 50 years, but like, I think that, and that's what we're up against, right, with these creative solutions is some of them we have to take account of like, what happens when the powerful people say no? But think about what this is saying and the challenge it is giving to society. And imagine what it would mean today, this value for the land. What are the implications for indigenous people who were displaced from their land if we advocated for something like a return of the land or the resources? For Black Americans who lost land and property during Reconstruction and, of course, all the years of unpaid labor. For Japanese Americans who lost so much property at the beginning of the internment. Think about the implications of this and for urban problems like gentrification or homelessness, which is a massive problem in California. And one example of where progressivism, which I'm pretty progressive, but like has totally dropped the ball, right? The most liberal states are some of the ones with the worst homeless problems. There's reasons for that. We don't have time for it. Now, of course, we can't map ancient law onto modern context. We don't live in an agrarian society anymore. Most of us, if we got some land, it wouldn't help us at all. We need jobs, not like not a plot of land in like a corner of Idaho somewhere. But we could think about this creatively. What does it mean to create a system where everybody has a basic and fundamental ability to live and to thrive? I don't know how you get there. Universal free college, strong social safety nets, affordable free healthcare, employment guarantees, universal basic income. Some of these things may work better or may not work at all. They may not be politically viable. There's no clear roadmap how we get here. But we can challenge ourselves in this direction. And if we try things and we keep working at it, we'll figure out what works and what doesn't pretty quick, right? All right. That was the law. We also get these awesome challenges from the prophets. I'm going to give you one quick example of this. In the Bible, prophets are not future tellers, although they sometimes talk about the future. They are primarily people who tell the community what God has to say to them. And in Isaiah 58, the prophet, on behalf of God, calls out the people who have been worshiping and fasting, and they're confused. They're like, we're fasting and we're praying and we're worshiping God, and you're not answering our prayers. And here's what Isaiah the prophet says in the voice speaking the words of God. Oops, I forgot my bullets. Is not this the fast I choose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke. Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own kin. They're showing devotion to God, the stuff that God told them to do. It's in the Bible. It's commands. Do this. And yet God says, I don't want your devotion, if that's what it is. I want the devotion where you do justice, economic justice with the people around you and in your communities and societies. Let's start there. This other stuff is good too. Don't neglect that stuff because I don't want this stuff without that stuff. That's powerful. What does it mean if we were to look at everything like through a lens like that? Bring that challenge to it, where I don't want to talk about this political issue or that political issue if there's injustice involved and we don't also have justice in this conversation. That it's not the only thing we care about, but it always matters in every framework. That's a challenge we could bring in our own thinking and in conversations we're in and in future opportunities we have to vote and to lobby and to march and whatever other ways we have influence, make phone calls. What kind of a country would this be if in every political conversation and in every local community decision, in every church, there were multiple voices at that table saying, yeah, but what about the justice ramifications of this? Or how do we do this in a way that increases justice instead of reducing it? What kind of country would that be? Now, we're never going to agree. We would still argue all the time. You get a whole bunch of activists in a room, right? We're never going to agree on exactly what justice looks like. We're never going to agree on exactly how we get there. But if we're all in the room having that conversation, then we're going to go in the right direction. Churches would be a great place to be embodying this principle. Communities like this one, where we start with this lens, and then we just keep it and we generate it out into society. I think this is what Jesus is doing when in the temple. When Jesus goes in there and starts turning things over in front of them, he's not trying to create a new system. He is giving a prophetic challenge to what he sees. He is calling out, injustice, this is wrong. And it's very notable that it probably doesn't change anything. When he leaves, they probably set the tables back up again, right? Except that by doing this, we're still talking about it 2,000 years later. The message has power, even if sometimes the system doesn't immediately change. In this case, in 3 of the Gospels, this passage happens very close to when Jesus gets arrested. And the implication is that it was because he did this that finally the religious authorities were like, okay, this is too much. And they arrested him. The system doesn't like to change and does not respond well to messages of challenge. But it didn't stop Jesus from doing this vivid prophetic image. Now, what is it he was calling out? What was wrong with what they were doing? You can make a really good argument that the money changers, what they were doing was very important and necessary for society. People were coming from all over the nations, coming to the temple to make their offerings. You don't bring a cow with you from some island in the Mediterranean, right? So they get there, they have to change their foreign currency, they have to buy something to sacrifice. They're in this place, and these money changers are doing it. So what's so wrong about what they're doing? Each of the gospel writers phrases it slightly differently. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus says this, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers." Why are they robbers? Are they cheating people in the temple? Is there exploitation? These pilgrims come from far away, and now they're here, and it's like they're just vulnerable to the locals being like, hey, let me use some false weights in this transaction or charge you more than this thing is worth. Perhaps Jesus is calling out that thing in our society, and we ought to take a challenge from this, a challenge to pursue fairness and stop exploitation. Mark has a slightly different variation. Pay attention, this one's really subtle. Is it not written, I don't mean just that he makes it as a question, but Is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you have made it a den of robbers? Why does he mention for all the nations? Scholars tell us that where these merchants were set up was in one of the three courts of the temple called the court of the Gentiles. This was the court that was set up for non-Jewish people to come and worship God. But when they get there, what do they find? Not a space to worship, but a room full of tables and animals and people making a ruckus and charging money. Their place of worship has become a marketplace. And isn't this also how things often go? That the locals, the insiders, the people with the privilege, the people with the voice in the ear of the government, set the system up in a way that works really well for them at the expense of the outsiders, the expense of the migrants and the refugees and the marginalized people. The challenge here might be, how do we stand alongside marginalized voices as we face in systems? How do we oppose systems that are rigged for the insiders? I have some friends who live down in the city of Pomona. They go to church down there, and for years they've been working with their neighbors in neighborhood organizing. And so they managed, the city had a problem. It's a big city. Pomona is much bigger than Claremont. And it has some wealthy districts and a lot of very under-resourced neighborhoods that are full of gang violence and other issues. And they worked in these neighborhoods with the neighbors like, what do you want to see here? What can we do? And the neighbors said, no one will listen to us, that our streets are dark and we're scared to go out at night. And so they organized together and like got the city to put in streetlights. And then later, the city wanted to put a garbage transfer station in their city, which are toxic for people who live around them. Why do those things end up in those neighborhoods? They could put them anywhere. They could put it here in Claremont. Everyone complains when they want to put it in their city, but people in Claremont have more influence, right? That's why the police move the homeless folks who show up in Claremont over to Pomona. In Pomona, there's 1 billion homeless folks in Pomona, and only a few you'll ever see in Claremont, right? But they're in there trying to work with neighbors saying, what can we do together to get the ear of government? In fact, one friend of mine actually essentially put his job at part-time or almost on the hold and just helped a guy campaign to be the new mayor, who then won the election. And a guy with an ear to what do the people in the city need apart from just a few rich folks. I'll talk about that guy in a minute. John has a different take, which we've already read. Remember what Jesus says in John? He says, take these things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace. It doesn't sound like he's concerned about robbery or other things. It sounds like he's just bothered that this commerce is happening in the house of God. Maybe it shouldn't happen. Maybe it's good and it just shouldn't happen here. Are there places that commerce just shouldn't happen? Maybe in the middle of a place of worship? By the way, you guys should buy my book. It's available after the next one. I don't know. What other places, though? Are there any places in our society now that aren't being commercialized and where someone isn't trying to turn it into a place where they can make money off of us? It's rapidly, it's constant. Our attention now is worth billions of dollars. And people they're using complicated AI mechanisms just to find the best ways to addict us to stare at their site longer so that they can make money off of us, right? What happens if we challenge a system where we say, no, not here. We're not doing this right here. Maybe it's fine somewhere else. It's not going to happen right here. I had this realization a few years ago. I grew up watching so many cartoons. I was a Gen Xer kid. We were just raised sitting in front of the TV, come home from school at this park and watch afternoon cartoons for a while. How many advertisements did I see all those years I did that? Who would ever, if you were designing a society, you were I want to make a good society, who would ever design a world where random people are allowed to market to your kids, to send messages to them, designed to appeal to them, to manipulate them into being greedy for their stuff, and to try to change their worldview so that they will be inclined to buy their things? Why do we ever let anyone do that to our kids? That is child's play compared to what is happening to all of us all the time right now, right? No, we can take a stand. We can challenge those systems, and moreover, once again, we can embody it. We can make choices that say, I'm not going to participate. Now, it's a little hard to just completely reject it entirely. I know people who, like said, on their Sabbath, they're like, I'm not going to do any social media on my Sabbath. It's my day free of social media, or I'm not going to do screens, or I'm going to, whatever. I know folks who've chosen to live very simply. This friend of mine, he went to school with Lorraine and me, like we overlap with him. He's actually my boss now. This guy who helped the neighbor, helped that guy run for mayor down in Pomona. This friend of mine is like a genius for business. He's great at business. He was a mudder, he started out in tech, and then he just kind of ended up being a manager kind of guy, and then he just launched his own business. He launches businesses now. He's like literally launching an international airline right now. But he has made so much money over the years. But he and his wife just keep living down in central Pomona, and they've agreed they always live on the median income for the city. And all the rest of his money, he's like, they just funnel it towards things that they think that money should do. Now, it's not easy to do that. I don't know how to do that. But it starts with a decision like, I'm not going to play by the same rules as the system when it comes to money. All right. Jesus does this kind of stuff a lot. He challenges the systems. He embodies what the change looks like. What if we follow his model? I know what I'm talking about could feel overwhelming because I've been talking systemic and I've thrown a lot of ideas out there. Some of us might just be feeling guilt. How am I going to do it all? Like I'm adding to your stress instead of like making you hopeful about the future. We can't address everything. Even Jesus didn't address everything. He made some important statements, but he didn't address everything. What matters is not that we fix everything, but where do we start? Right? That's the question for us. Where do we start? What is within my power and my capacity to begin doing? And so I'm going to end by sending us back into our discussion, little groups. And I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. How do you fix the world? No. What is one aspect of the system that you would personally like to challenge? Like an outward thing that you would like to see, this is something I want to work at when I get opportunities. And what is an initial step you can take? And the second question is, what is one way you'd like to embody a different way of living? Now again, you may not have had time to really absorb this or not, so you don't have to answer each question thoroughly, but let this just be a prompt and go ahead in your groups and talk about this again.